En núna ætla ég að bregða fyrir mig útlenskunni til að kynna næsta fyrirlesara. We are lucky to have with us today the Secretary General of the International Aluminium Institute. In his talk, he's going to give us a global perspective of the development of the aluminium industry. Mr. Ron Knapp, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you. Let me start with an apology. I can't speak Icelandic. We're going to talk in English, and we're going to talk in bad English because I'm an Australian. And I've passed through London for a few years, but I'm still an Australian. And another apology. We're going to do Iceland in 4 days, but this morning I'm going to try and do the aluminium industry in 15 minutes. And I'm pleased to see the Jaguar outside. It is a living example of the innovation, the creativity within the world of aluminium use. A modern metal, new in historic terms, innovation driving more and more applications, and creativity continues that cycle. Who are we? What are we? The IAI is the Global Industry Association representing the industry, dominated in the upstream down through to the fabrication part, but essentially engaged also in those final parts, the use and reuse segments. Many of you work for companies who are members of the IAI, Rio Tinto, Alcoa, and of course other members such as Rusal, Chalco in China, Norsk Hydro in Norway, etc. So, I need to move on very quickly. We have a series of industry-wide objectives covering things such as governance, people, places, greenhouse gas emissions, waste, and products. Our key objectives are to increase the demand for aluminium, to provide a global forum, and to identify issues in the production, use and recycling of aluminium, and promote appropriate research on other areas. We need to encourage and assist continuous improvement in healthy, safe and environmentally sound production, to collect, analyse and publish statistical data, and you'll find that all on our websites, and communicate the views and positions of the industry to international agencies and other relevant parties. For us, as an industry, we must demonstrate that we produce responsibly, that there is a net benefit to society from our product, and at the end of that product life, the value of the metal comes back in the cycle. My presentation, the slides, will be available to anybody and everybody after today. In terms of material stewardship, our industry must justify the use of global resources and demonstrate safe management of all facilities. I am sure we can all remember mishaps that have damaged that situation. If any part of the value chain fails to provide safe conditions or fails to identify and manage its risks, the whole industry's license to operate and its license to market its products is threatened. We are vulnerable to the global impact of the weakest performer. A snapshot of one of our websites. Please go and look, it doesn't fit in the 15 minutes. What is going on in the world of aluminium? The predictable is unpredictable. We could look at things such as the geopolitics at work in the world today. Q4 2016 saw a reversal in commodity situations. We saw oil, we saw coal, we saw iron ore, even aluminium riding on the up escalator for once in its life. Will it be different this time? And I suspect and submit that by the time we got to the end of Q1 2017, many of you would say, no, it's the same thing over again. We go up and we go down. I've got this far without mentioning the word China. It's impossible to get through a presentation on our industry without recognising that there is China, there is the rest of the world, but at the end of the day, there is only one global industry. Does it matter to Iceland? You can tell me. There are all sorts of things, world trade, globalisation, and the demand for our product. What has really happened? Well, if we look back, and it's only 15, 16 years, on the left-hand side of this curve, you'll see a very small little piece of mustard in the bottom left-hand corner. That was China. If you think you can predict and get correct the impact on our industry, good luck. We can go back and look at that. But what's interesting, and these are quarter only stats. They're not annual, they're quarter only. But we like to show so we see where we're going. And by the time we got to the end on the right-hand side, you can see that we've clearly spilt the mustard pot, and we've got plenty of mustard all over the graph. But it's not just production. That's production. But the surprise is that China has grown that production. They're up around, well, last year, 31 million tonnes of production. They've also got 31 million tonnes of consumption. Now, where did that come from? That's growing the market, and that's a key issue for all of us. Where are we in the cycles? The global aluminium industry and upstream dynamics and structural change. It has never stopped. It continues to change. Where are we now? Are we integrating or are we separating? We can look at some classic examples. I won't go to Rio Tinto, that'd be tricky. We'll leave that one aside. We'll move on. There are evidence, though, of more aluminium players seeking to have greater control over the upstream raw material supply chain. The Middle East is moving into alumina and to bauxite. There are other dynamics as well. Many of you perhaps have heard what's going on in China at the moment. There's a multiple set of new policies, new directions, new regulations that have the potential to impact the industry. It could create a new market dynamic. It's not just one. I've mentioned the winter shutdown there. And what's interesting with the winter shutdown, it's more likely to impact the global carbon anode market than the aluminium metal side of our business. There are other elements that come in there to play an impact as well. New environmental regulations. China's getting serious about clean air. There is also the issue of excess investment that the Chinese government is curbing, cutting back what they define as illegal production units. But China will continue to grow as it did in 2016 and 2017. It was fairly stable through 2016. We've already seen production jump in 2017. You've got to be careful with the figures for China. Q1 always has a blip in it. It's linked to the Spring Festival. Lots of people close down for 3 or 4 weeks. But what we're seeing is expectations that China will have grown their production during this year. But we have to go back to those other elements and what impacts will they have. Certainly, we've already seen the global anode market tighten since the announcements in China. To go along with that 36 million tonnes of production this year, we also see a number of forecasts out of China, from the Chinese, that they're going to grow their demand from 31 million tonnes in 2016 up to 36 this year. That's a dramatic increase. None of the rest of us can do that. It's a different world and it's a different dynamic impacting on our industry. So we can go and look at consumption. We go back to 2014, 55, last year, 59, and now people are predicting at least 67 million tonnes of consumption in 2020. That's only 3.5 years away. It's significant. After a deficit in 2014, a surplus in 2015, more or less in balance in 2016, depending on whose numbers you're willing to believe. We can think back. Consumption in 2005 was only 32 million tonnes, and yet last year we were at 59. This is a growth industry. It's happening in somebody else's backyard more often than not, but we are very lucky to have a robust, growing, innovative industry. Primary demand, well, there you go. Mustard is back in lumps. But let's move on a little bit. The primary aluminium track record in the market and in the community. 1.25 billion tonnes of primary production since 1888 in rough terms. So that's 1,250 million tonnes. And about 3/4 of that aluminium is still in use. It's a positive recycling story, but it's more significantly a story of demand growth for light, strong, conductive, protective products and durability. Aluminium in long lifetime products has not yet reached the end of their first life. And long lifetime products also tend to have very high recycling rates, greater than 90%. So 75% is still in use, and it's estimated that at least 50% of that is still in its first use. We know we can roll a Coke can through the US market in about 60 days from the time it's filled once, consumed, recycled, and back on the shelf. That's at one extreme. And then we have evidence and examples of buildings where the aluminium was put in those buildings over 60 years ago and is still there in its initial first use phase. I'm not going to dwell on this. It's too complicated. It's too complicated in English. Goodness knows what it's like in Icelandic. But it shows you material flows running through to aluminium flows. And the big blue circle on the right-hand side is that 950 million tonnes of aluminium still in use. And you can track that through. But what's happening when we drill down? We drill down into the impacts and the benefits of our industry. And we can talk about greenhouse gas emissions. And we know there's about 50 gigatons of CO2 equivalent in emissions. And we're responsible for something like 0.8 of a gigaton of that 50. 70% of that comes from electricity-related emissions and 30% from our own direct emissions. But on the other side, on the right-hand side, we have the opportunities to reduce greenhouse emissions through the use of aluminium. That's why we can never let go of that use part of the equation. We need that use, we need that recycling. Aluminium, where does it get the benefits? Green buildings, lightweight vehicles, the Jaguar outside, a classic example, not only of consumption, but also importantly, creativity, protective packaging, efficient machinery, etc. And last year we completed a major study on aluminium in sustainable cities. And there's a set of publications on our website that you can read. And then we get to transport, whether it's aircraft, marine, trains, buses, auto. The use of 1 kilogram of aluminium replacing heavier materials in a car or light truck can save 20 kilos of CO2 over the life of the vehicle. And that's a net 20 kilos. Replacing our impact side, the benefits outweigh those impacts. And the figure's higher in things such as trains. And that research came from a project that was undertaken back in 2004, 2005, and we revisited that study late last year, and that was published earlier this year. It is on our website, and it in fact confirms where those results are. And in fact, the benefits and savings in trains were certainly shown up again. But we use a lot of energy. But we've reduced that energy intensity over the last 30 years or so, and we can see the lines going down. The top line is AC, the bottom line is DC. But then, what does that mean? That's a global number. If we look at it, it's a bit like spaghetti, but if we look at it, we see Europe's not doing so well. North America's not doing so well. What has dragged down and improved that energy intensity number is in fact China. It is the new technology in China that is generating that benefit, apparent benefit for our industry. But then, we've got another problem. The light blue at the bottom is hydro-powered electricity coming into our smelter power mix. The red is coal. So just a minute ago, we're talking about energy intensity has improved. Great story. But what's happened to our overall greenhouse gas intensity over that time? And what's happened? Back on the left-hand side, you'll see the piece in the middle of the graph. I'll have to call it yellow, I can't call it mustard now. That's PFCs. And from 1990 down to 2010, you can see how we managed to shrink that PFC number in our intensities. It was a great story, but we've got to get over it. We've done it now, and it's gone. We're a bad industry back there, but we improved. We've fixed the PFC story, almost. But at the same time, when we add in China to our numbers, because back in the early days we didn't have access to Chinese numbers, we come in now and what we see is the indirect impact from that electricity. And so we are now at a situation where our greenhouse gas intensity per tonne of aluminium has gone up. Something to remember. What are the 2017 challenges? Predictable is now unpredictable. Remember the geopolitical changes. There's a risk to a globalised world, the rise of national and regional market protection, US and China squabbling, ongoing development and deployment of cost-competitive modern technology, that will continue. And we're seeing that that is continuing more and more in China. And China is moving to change their energy mix, but that is going to take a long time. What do you need to do? You need to focus on market opportunities, continued substitution, emerging markets, new innovative applications in our industry. And above all, you have to identify your corporate opportunities in a positive future. And one last thing, recycling is very important, but we are continuing, because of the growth, because of the strong growth in our industry, demand continues to go up. The recycling happens, but the good thing is long life use is holding that material in the market. It will eventually come back, but it is still there. And what does that mean? It means primary aluminium demand will continue to grow. That takes us out to 2030, and that's a modelled scenario, not a market prediction. Thank you very much.